Can you talk about the origin of our friendship?
The origin of our friendship. Well, it all started way back in sunny Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
We were training at the same place, and we kind of the first couple of days we kind of looked at each other. We're like, "Who is this fucking guy coming in here, picking up my ping pong paddle, thinking he's the shit?" And it took us like 2 days to kind of warm up to each other. I was like, "Hey, Julian, how you doing? Nice to meet you. I've seen a lot of your film. You know, you're a great player. We should
right. You didn't say that.
We should hang out sometime." And then he's like, "Where do you live?" And I'm like, "I'm in Venice. Where do you live?" He's like, "I'm in Venice." And then I'll see you later at 3 on the beach. And then the rest is history.
The rest is history. Favorite story of our time in New England? What's your favorite story of our time?
My favorite story of our time, probably when we bought those 2 dirt bikes and we were crushing Foxborough in our free time, running from police. I remember one time I was sitting on my couch. It was snow. It was probably 10 degrees outside, and you took one of the bikes out for a spin, and then you came back in, and your hands were like literally frozen, and you're like, "I just had to run. I just had to run from the cops." I'm like, "Dude, what are you doing running from the police on a Thursday afternoon in our own city?"
Every off season, we would always buy something, some activity, some toy. One year it was like remote control cars. We broke them the first day. Next year it was like little mini bikes. We rode them for like 2 months.
Yeah.
We had we went through a drone stage, one of the little inside drones in the houses.
Yeah. Drone. And we played ping pong every day, probably.
Every day.
Probably 20 games of ping pong until one of us was muddy and bleeding.
Muddy and or bleeding. Dip spit everywhere.
Yeah.
Water bottles everywhere. We played in Danny's old little he had a basement that was unfinished at the house he was staying at, and it was like cement, and we'd just be spitting, hitting balls. He beat me with an iPhone. He taught me he had an iPhone once. I didn't play ping pong growing up. This guy was like one of those world-class like dudes that you see in China. Forrest Gump. This guy was Forrest Gump. Best hand-eye coordination. He beat me with the fucking iPhone. It was crazy.